Awesome. Middle of April already. It's crazy to think how quick this year is going, that we're into Q2, those of you who live by quarters of
Why?
sales. Am I echoing somewhere? There we go. All right. So you heard the voice too. All right. Welcome.
Those are the voices in my head.
I was like, who's talking? So welcome everyone to the April Fireside Chat. Happy Easter week. And we're going to go ahead and get started with this month's section. So we were supposed to have two panelists on today, but for those of you who might have read the description, Alex Farling was going to join us, but travel and schedules sometimes get a little crazy. And honestly, this is Kyle's area of expertise inside of Empath to begin with. Putting a lot of pressure on you there, Kyle. So we're going to go ahead and get started for the day. This month, we're talking about growing leadership in your MSP, especially layers of leadership. For those of you very small MSPs, that might be a journey that you're starting on. For large MSPs, that's something that you continue to have to work on. It's not a one and done thing that you're over with. So we're just going to go ahead and start with a bit of a question here. If you feel like answering in the chat, you can. But I'm going to go ahead and start here with a Kyle. Let's get people in the right frame of mind. What's a good challenging situation that you might have faced in your career that showed you needed to grow layers of leadership in your own organization, be that your MSP or Empath?
Ooh, this is like the which one, which almost creates there's a fun psychology about asking open-ended questions, which we can get into later. But if I was to think about the most challenging situation I have faced in my career, so I got fired from the first MSP I worked at, and it was a huge, it was just a very emotional period in my life. We had a lot of success. We were really growing fast, and I got egotistical in being the CEO because I was a hired CEO. And through that ego, right, I needed something to bring me back down to earth. And when I got brought back down to earth, right, my head got too big to fit through the door, Becky. I was opened up with the opportunity because I was really good friends with one of our vendors to actually get a second chance. So that second chance, I went to another MSP in my hometown of San Diego, and same thing. Hey, hired CEO, can you go ahead and grow this? Because I'm more of a business strategy guy, not an IT person. And the challenge was we want to triple our size in 3 years. And we were $4 million and we wanted to get to $12 million. We wanted to go from about 30 employees to about 100 employees. So the challenge really became, okay, if growth and scale, both of them in tandem, by the way, those are different constructs, is to happen, how do we make this work? Well, you can't grow through operational maturity. You have to start growth through sales. So we had to build out a sales engine, be very humble. I had to go, I don't know any of this crap, right? I had to start from a position of not knowing anything, and let's make this happen. I could go and talk for the next 12 hours, which I usually do, on how we achieved that, but we actually accomplished that goal within 2 years, not 3 years. Some of it was dumb luck. Some was it with one really good customer, right? About 40% of it. But we were able to actually get to 15 million in 3 years and be about 115 employees. So that was the biggest challenge, to be quite honest, and be vulnerable. I had panic attacks. I developed anxiety really bad. Hair started falling out of my head. Why I still miss part of my eyebrows and got a big old patch of hair missing from the back of my head for those that know me. And it took every ounce of my soul to make it happen. But we got there. We had high employee satisfactions. I don't think we killed our employees in the process. But what we're going to probably talk about some of it today was what we recognized a lot in that journey was sales was never our bottleneck. It was our people were our bottlenecks. So that's actually what gave rise to the first kind of inclination in my head of what empath ends up becoming. Was it was always our people that would either be a lack of, or the abilities of our people became the bottleneck.
Oh, and I have to believe that sometimes that is even your layers being that bottleneck, that sometimes your leaders get more in the way than anybody. So we're going to go ahead and put a poll up now, one more to kind of get everybody on the right frame of mind. So on a layered leadership poll, if you had to describe your current organization's leadership structure as a tiered cake, how would you describe it? I love the tiered cake concept in this. I think that's a fun way to look at it. So while y'all are answering, we'll go ahead and kind of get started here. Now, in our prep call, Kyle, we talked a little bit about the need for resilient leadership as MSPs scale. Can you go into a little bit why resilience is a key word there?
Ooh, and I looked at you and I said, "Oh, my favorite word, resilience." And let's start there. I want to start with that word because that word becomes so important to how you build yourself as a leader. So I'm going to read the definition verbatim, and then we're going to break that down to how that works. So resilience, as defined by Oxford, is the capacity to withstand or to recover quickly from difficulties. And sometimes that is synonymized with toughness. Now, why that's an important construct is everyone's self-actualization with what is tough or what is difficult is different. So when you're building layered leadership, you have to recognize what's hard for you or what's easy for you is not hard or easy for somebody else. And when that moment that happens that is overwhelming to an individual, what actually happens in your brain is a flood of a hormone called cortisol. That's the stress hormone. So resilience really is biologically, for all the IT people in this call, resilience is how much cortisol floods someone's brain during a moment of stress. So for you, the owner of an MSP, I will have usually less cortisol in the brain because I have become desensitized to a stressful environment where your new hire or your new leader does not have that resilience to overcome a certain problem. So when you are creating layered leadership, what you really have to think about is what is going to be the scenarios that have to be managed, and how do I build up my team to be okay with certain scenarios, aka an incident, right? Or the printer failed for the 400th time, or an employee has an internal conflict that I have to manage. So what ends up happening as you grow in scale is you have to start recognizing that there's going to be limits of people's abilities or the capacity of their time to manage things. So that's really how I start to think of layered leadership is not like a corporatized, you have to have managers for the sake of managers, but you're going to have an ability or a time constraint that you then have to manage. And as you grow, you have to create more managers because a small thing, let's printers. You might have such a huge printer business that becomes a huge risk to your business. So now you need someone to just manage your efficiencies when it comes to printers, because eventually there's a business outcome. So anyway, it's a long-winded response. I know that was probably a little bit more nerdier than some wanted, but
But you talked, you talked about the cortisol factor. So I'm a big fan of audiobooks. When I say read, it sometimes means listen. I'm
yeah,
listening to the Let Them book now. And a big piece that she talks about is that cortisol response in your brain. And you talked, about your experience at your first MSP into your second. Sometimes those fears, those
yeah.
things are past traumas, not always the current thing. And so, you're dealing with people's past experiences at work as well. And then you talk a little bit, or we talk a lot on Fireside Chat about the importance of incident response planning. And, at Write a Boom, Ethan Tancredi and I built an entire game around that,
Oh,
the
you guys
Hunter
need to
Hacker
release that. I will
board
buy
game.
it yesterday.
It's on its way. We're finding printers and finishing the proofs. I just saw proofs earlier this week.
I'm
Uh,
excited.
but we talk about that and the importance of practice. That practicing makes those scary situations less scary.
Yeah.
Printer failings, things like that, incidents, like all of those, if you practice your responses, it's less scary
Well, let's
and
go
makes you
into that,
more
right?
resilient.
That's why it's a time constraint, because practice takes time that someone's not answering the phones on a help desk. And if I go back early into my career in corporate retail with Best Buy, we had a mandate. One of our biggest KPIs was role playing. Literally, we handed supervisors a deck of cards that had a bunch of different possible people that you are today. And you had to role play that scenario with your people And this goes into resilience because, uh, by the way, we can get into risk as well, risk adverse and risk seeking. This is a interesting topic in the MSP space with resilience. But if my employees have the opportunity to practice on their manager, then they can receive immediate feedback. You can now coach them in the moment, right? This is the word mentorship. Sometimes leadership and mentorship get kind of combined when they're totally different things. You can be a mentor
Yes.
and not a leader, but you need the opportunity. And this kind of goes with not just Ethan in the Monopoly game, but Ethan also with Bob Miller in the IR game. How
Mhm.
often are you practicing with your team to overcome a situation that you may not see as stressful, but they will see as stressful? And one of the fun things I love in this channel is we always talk about best practice. And I think it's a horrible word, honestly, because best is stupid. But when employees are introduced in a moment of stress, they're not going to go to best practice. They're going to go to last practice. And I made a funny LinkedIn post the other day. There was an earthquake in San Diego, 4 miles from my house. It was 5.2. It shook the walls. Shit fell off the walls.
Oh,
And
geez.
what happened? Yeah, 5.2 is not big, but when you're 4 miles from the epicenter, it feels a lot larger than you think. Um, what did I do? Literally, the first thought in my head was to hide under the desk because that was what I was taught in grade school because that's the last time I had done an earthquake drill.
Yeah.
And then my wife shouts from the other room, "Did you grab our son?" Yeah, I'm admitting this because it's horrible, but this is exactly what happens to your engineers. They have a moment of stress. They're going to go to what they've always done, which if that's escalate a ticket and the server room is on fire, what are they going to do? Who do I escalate this to? They're not going to go reach for a fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
So,
Ooh. All right. This is going to be good, everybody. This is also your reminder, like put stuff in the chat, put stuff in Q&A. Like this gets better if we get feedback from all of you as well. So you talked a little bit about bottlenecks, in your example. What are some common leadership bottlenecks that you've seen in your business as you've talked to other MSPs, and how do those really impact your business's growth?
so when I think of that, there's a couple things with bottlenecks. The first of which is going to be decision making. We are nerds, meaning we love data. All I hear about is what is the KPI, 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 KPI. We restart, and then what happens is once I know the KPI, I hyper focus on getting that 100% perfect. Like that, right? Perfection becomes the need. So we remove our ability to manage through instinctive reflexes. And Colin Powell's famous for talking about this 40-70 rule to where as a leader, I only want 40% of the information to make a decision because if I wait for 70%, either the fire is going to burn too long or the data is going to make people ask too many questions and therefore decision making takes too long. So, right, it's your ability to have a team that can make decisions based off of speed, which becomes a second bottleneck, which then becomes quality. Well, I can't do things unless things are perfect. And Steve Jobs is famous for talking about product development, and he has this famous talk at a worldwide developer conference. I don't know if you've seen this, Becky. Let me know in chat if you've seen this YouTube video. It's fantastic, where Steve Jobs is getting heckled. Literally, people are going, "Why did you not use the latest version of Java?" And in a moment of brilliance, like I know the guy's got some bad things you can say about it, but in a moment of brilliance, he takes a moment, he thinks about what he wants to say, and he goes, "Well, you would think as an engineer, we should always use the latest version of Java. However, what we never then ask ourselves is what does the customer actually want? But if we wait for the customer to have a problem or a desire and come to us and ask for things, now engineers are not building our product. The customer is telling us the product to build that they will buy. If engineers build the product, we're going to create a problem where marketing now needs to manufacture the pain. Now, why I bring this up is as MSPs, when I obsess about quality, the quality is at your definition as an owner of the MSP. You are the nerd of all nerds. You are the guy that loves delivering what you deliver. But does anyone want to buy it? Is the problem. If you engineer it to be so expensive that not a single customer in your area wants to buy your product, then you don't have a company. So, right, this kind of goes into like this bottleneck conversation of either you've built an MSP practice that no one wants to buy, or two, you don't make decisions because you're afraid of not having enough data to make that decision.
Wow. And you think of what Apple was building at that time that that conversation would have happened. People didn't even know what was possible. It was so cutting edge that if you waited for customer feedback, they were reacting to the thing that you'd already built, not necessarily understanding fully where it could go. And
Well, and what's funny
engineering
about this
cycles
is,
don't allow for that anyway.
well, not to like pat anyone on the back, but Huntress did a great job with this, right? When Kyle was starting off and building out Huntress, he didn't go build what all of the other EDR companies were building in enterprise. Because if he did that, now I need to compete for shared marketplace, which is tough when you have companies that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years with a lot more money. When you listen to the problems that MSPs were having, multi-tenancy, I don't have people to look at alerts, right? Like now I'm going, okay, I can build to that problem. If they didn't listen, then no one's going to buy it. MSPs weren't going to buy EDR at that point. I remember I built an MSSP out of my MSP in 2017, and I had to build a SOC because there wasn't anyone to manage the EDR alerts, or the EDR didn't even exist. It was SIM, but
Yeah, it was, wait, geez, that was the early days of MDR even. That was just a
oh yeah.
different
And
scenario, and socks were new. And I think at that point, everybody thought they'd just build their own. Like
well,
sock
and not
was
only
the,
that is nerds being nerds, they were saying, Kyle, we can't do MDRs. It doesn't give me log alerts on the firewall and switches. And I'm sitting there going, does it matter for someone that can only afford $1,000 a month?
and oh, so when you're building those layers, if you're considering
Yep.
building layers, I know there's a science behind how many reports you should have.
Yeah.
And I believe that also ties back some in the Colin Powell scenario, but how many, like if you're growing a team, how many people can one leader effectively manage?
Fantastic question. And it depends, right? Because when you have, it's a spectrum. If you are an experienced leader and you have your processes, you probably can do a little more than your tier 3 engineer that just became a service manager and is not getting any help with becoming a better service manager other than a better nerd. By the way, I say nerd respectfully. I was part of Geek Squad. I wore the shirt and tie for years. Yes, so I've been that guy. But going back to your question, so your brain, it works like a computer. You have short-term memory and you have long-term memory. You have RAM and you have a hard drive. But where our memories are flawed is short-term memory. A human mind can only remember 7 bits of information. 7. And they have proven this through recall studies. Like literally, this goes back to even some people going, how, like when people go like pi, how do I remember 400 places to pi? What they find is they actually chunk up the number into 7 bits of information. There's some recall techniques that they use. Now, that number is plus or minus 2. There's a great book called 7 plus or minus 2, the magic number, or something like that. I can't remember who wrote it. Someone in chat, correct me there, please. But 7 bits of information. That's why, by the way, phone numbers are 7
I was
numbers.
just thinking phone numbers for those
Phone numbers
like
are
two
7.
phone numbers I remember because they're all saved. But yes.
Yep. And well, here's a fun one. Area codes, your mind sees that as 1 bit because it doesn't change very often. So that's actually 8 bits of information. So you're still within that plus or minus 2. Kind of a
Even in
fun
the
little
old
thing there.
school breakdown, that was in a different format.
Yes, exactly. Well, and then you add country code and everything goes lost. But with 7 bits of information, that actually applies to your team. Because what happens is if you have more than 7 people, I have to check in with more than 7 people, which means I need to be able to recall what more than 7 people are doing at any one time or did in a previous week. So commonly, military platoons actually typically only have 5 to 9 people. And this is exactly why, because if I'm mentoring people, if I'm giving them immediate feedback, if I'm practicing with them, I need to be able to do that consistently because it also takes 90 days to build a habit, 100,000, 10,000 hours or whatever the Eastern philosophy is on that to become proficient. So, right, you start to see this. Now, for an MSP, right, you're going, man, so if I get to 15 people, I need 2 people managers, right? Or if I go to 22 people, I need 3 people managers. There's a way to scale some of this layered leadership. And this is where, if you look at corporate retail, right, this is why you see leads and supervisors and other layers of leadership, because can I start to baby step somebody in a career path to start managing people? So, for example, at my MSP, we did the pod model, the second MSP. We did that because we had to be a national presence. So we had to base some people in some geographical areas. So the pod model made sense for us. Not a huge fan of it because it costs a lot of money. I've done other conversations on this before. But going back to this, is the pod lead was a similar to a supervisor. They only had to manage 3 to 4 people. However, I didn't have to think of them as a manager, as more as a mentor or in the moment training, so that then the manager really just had to do the more managerial operational stuff, right? Because they managed the pod leads. Trying to think if there's anything with this. Then it kind of comes a prioritization exercise of what layers are most important next to add those next 7 people. But anywho, I digress.
No, the science behind 7 makes a lot of sense, and it's
Shrek.
Shrek. I'm trying not to look at the chat too much, you guys, because it usually just starts to make me laugh. So
I'm curious, actually, for people
yeah.
in chat, how many of your managers are actually QCing, like looking at work and giving direct feedback to your team? Or is this something that we do on a rainy day?
Or once a year at
Or once a year?
review
It's,
time for those of you who do those.
by the way, their timesheets don't count. That's not in the feedback. That's just beating them over the head with a process that, tells us where profitability is.
I'm laughing. So I see Tracy responding in, can vouch, all of hers do. I just had my one-on-one with her this morning. Huntress does a really solid job at making sure that we don't overtask any manager. Now, there are times when somebody is, I like that I said Becky's doing a great job. Hey, I have the notes to prove it. But there are times where, you have somebody leave, there has to be some changeover. But for the most part, I think that because as somebody who reports to a manager, not feeling like you ever get any of their time also leaves you feeling pretty stagnant in your role and doesn't allow for growth.
Well, and this is what creates sometimes feelings of micromanagement, because you don't have enough time to truly mentor your people. So what ends up happening is you put systems in place, guardrails, to where they can't do anything but that one thing. And they're going to only report on a KPI, no subjective analysis at all. It's just objective measurements. That's going to give your employees that feeling of micromanagement, because becomes a time constraint that the people manager has, to where they can't do anything but micromanage or overly dictate how people do their jobs. It's an interesting model that you can actually draw parallels to employee satisfaction. Now, for those of you that are smaller MSPs on the call, this doesn't mean every 7 employees you hire a manager either, because you don't have the cash flow to hire dedicated people managers. I've ran an MSP. I know this. However, you have to understand that when you start to overextend your employees, 9 reports, 10 reports, 11 reports, 15 reports, that manager, that's number is where you can start to predict burnout of that manager. When they start to get to 14, 15, 16 employees, they're going to start getting antsy, and then they will only manage through instinct, meaning they're going to play whack-a-mole. It's always going to be firefighting. So when you want to start being proactive and have time to start doing some deep dives and start improving efficiencies, that's that point where I would say 130 to 150% capacity. That's where you should have enough cash flow to add that next layer of separation.
So it also allowing the right amount of managers, reports, growing those layers allows you to do some better delegation and also increases your operational efficiency. So I shared the story yesterday on our prep call. So for those of you who don't know, prior to coming to Huntress, I used to work for what was HTG Peer Groups, now IT Nation Evolve, founded by the amazing Arlen Sorensen. And Arlen, as most entrepreneurs do, would periodically come into especially our leadership meetings and throw out ideas or criticize and try and kind of throw a monkey wrench into what we were doing. And at one point, we had a pretty pointed conversation of like, why do you do this? What is causing you to do this? And he explained what he calls the sense of urgency, that when you, as a leader, feel like the ones who are building it behind you or with you aren't treating your baby with the same sense of urgency, i.e., hiding under the desk and not getting them as the earthquake hits, things, you feel the need to step in. So that can also lead to a bit of your team following shiny object syndrome of every time the leader comes in and says, we should do this, you can have people who follow along and think they need to execute on that. So we ended up, and for those of you in the peer groups, you've heard of Arlen's mulligans. We ended up saying that he could have 3 mulligans a year. 3 mulligans where he could come in and put a absolute stop to what we were doing, have us go down a completely different path. So when he would come in with those ideas, we'd say, is this mulligan worthy? Like, is this the thing you want us doing? 9 times out of 10, it wasn't. Or he would try and get someone else to introduce the idea so he didn't eat up one of his mulligans. But it ended up becoming a kind of a creative way that worked for us as an organization to make sure that delegation was happening at the right layers. The who, not how principle, Kyle, talk to me about that a little bit.
So the who not how principle is really it's a mental exercise for those of you that Dan Sullivan, fantastic read. It's a book called Who Not How for the owners in the call. The idea with the who not how principle is the idea that sometimes when something needs to be done as owners or as managers or leaders, you think about the how. How am I going to do this? And that becomes a capacity trap for leaders because now you are problem solving. You are solving the problem. Well, you are not scalable. You do not have the ability to solve all problems. And you also don't want to be the first person that people call when a problem happens. Like how many of you in chat like are the person that everyone calls when something goes wrong and you don't have a documented process? So what you have to recognize is if you're always the one that things get escalated to, you need to start asking who, because you need to find someone that can take that responsibility off your plate. And I talk to a lot of MSP owners. I've coached a lot of MSPs. Where this becomes the owner's prerogative and the owner's problem, like you said, like instinctually reacting like Arlen was, is sometimes you don't have a chance to mentor or the time to mentor or to lead people to a solution. You just give them the solution and now it turns into a dictatorship. So what you have to figure out is how do I build a team of people, problem solvers, and not just always be the problem solver. A really great question when anyone approaches you with a problem, and my employees hated this, is right. You ask them, well, what research have you done? What do you think the answer is? And they would think I was being lazy, right? Like there's a point where your employees should start to get upset with that. And the second they start getting upset with that, what you find is then the next bottleneck becomes decision making, not problem solving. Like, hey, they're finding ways to fix the problem, but have you given them the authority to make the decision? And that's uncomfortable when your employees start
Uncomfortable
making
hearing it.
decisions. Yes. Because you know what's going to
Oh,
happen? They're going to fuck up.
Keith, you put it, having to let employees go through problem solving, even though you know the answer. Letting people
Yeah.
fall a little bit. It's that fail fast mentality. Like,
Fail fast, fail hard. I mean, here's a fun anecdote for you. Aerosmith actually created my personal mantra. I know it's not love in an elevator. Jim Collins did an interview with Aerosmith. Out of all the people in the world to interview Aerosmith, why Jim Collins was talking to them, I don't know. But if you've ever read Good to Great, fantastic read, or the other one, I can never remember the name of the blue one, not the red one. He interviewed them on how they write a song. And they had an interesting way to do it. They actually called it the Dare to Suck meeting. What they would do is each have a 3x5 postcard and they would write some dumb idea on the card. and they would throw it on a table and they would look at all the ideas and then they would play kind of like a shuffling motion to figure out what they're going to write about. But why Jim Collins got interested on it was the Dare to Suck meeting was giving permission to have bad ideas. It was giving people permission to fail. It was giving them what you'd call in psychology agency to try. And for a lot of your teams, you're so afraid of problems or people messing up that they don't feel like they have the agency to try anymore because everything has to go back to that word perfect. The idea of incrementally improving is not a culture that you might have in your organization. So, right, you have to give them agency to make mistakes. And if your MSP doesn't have agencies for them to make mistakes because you're afraid of, Kyle, I can't make mistakes because a security problem could happen. Well, great. Now you have to have employees that can only be perfect or fail. That's it. Doesn't sound like a great place to work to me.
Oh, you guys are killing it in chat. Like, I thank you for sharing
Well,
this.
it turns into the problem of benchmarks, right?
Mm.
Because, Becky, you see it. What should my KPI be? And people go right to targets, not what to measure. Best in class is 400%. How many MSPs are best in class? And when I go to my employees and say, guys, we need to be 400% to whatever, now you're opening them up to the other problem with failure of always failing. They're never good enough. So as leaders, we have to find a way to walk a tightrope between improvement, right? Encouraging them to continue to have agency to try, but also edging towards best in class. And this becomes another capacity problem with leadership of Kyle, I don't have time to redo our scorecards every quarter. Well, no, you don't have to redo the scorecard, but can you move the goalpost a little bit? A little bit, a little bit. Can I manage my employees to where when they get to do something really good, really fast, I move the goalpost just a tad because we all want to get better. But Kyle, that's going to hurt employee culture because they're going to think we're undermining them. Well, no, people want to win. They want to be able to see that they're winning. You want to be able to communicate to them what happens if everybody wins. Ooh, we make more profitability as an MSP. Okay, have the conversation with them. Start talking dollars and cents with them. If we make more money, I can give you raises every year. If we make more money, I can do profit sharing. If we make more money, then I can hire people quicker than you being 150% to capacity. Maybe I can cash flow it at 125% to capacity. Your employees a lot of times aren't getting their raises every year because your margins suck. How about we have that conversation with our employees? It's tough love, but the guys that are growing really fast, that's what they're doing. It's not tickets closed, it's profitability of clients. It's let's spend less time on them. Let's get efficient. Anywho.
No, that's we knew we were going to never make it through the entire outline we had. I didn't realize how far into it we would get with how little of the outline we've gotten through.
If we want to, I could show the little model I built for that too.
Yes, let's do that. Let's do that. And then we'll try and wrap up, knowing that we are going to do kind of a part 2 of this, I think in July is what I'm looking at for the schedule of talking a little bit about how you grow leaders, not at the executive level of your company, but the service level. So we'll bring in some service leaders, some service managers who have built teams.
My people.
Talk a bit about that journey. So know that there is a part 2 coming where we'll get a bit more tactical on the service piece. But Kyle.
And by the way, Richard, not a sales pitch. I do a call every month called Service Manager Cohort. Follow me on LinkedIn, or Becky, you can send it back to everybody. And we beat this up every single month. New topics. It's 100% free. Just because this is the underserved community, service leaders, service managers, and you statistically have the most employees to manage in all of the MSP channel. So I'm here to help, guys.
And a bad service team can kill your MSP. Like that is your front line. That is your customer facing. It's everything in your work.
I used to make a joke that I could save any MSP 15% gross margin points in 90 days. Horribly, it came because we were overstaffed. Every MSP is overstaffed. I say that, and I know, Kyle, you shouldn't talk in absolutes. Only Siths talks in absolutes. Guys, my last consulting firm, we did bookkeeping for MSPs as one of our services, and I saw thousands of MSP P&Ls, probably just as many as service leadership sees. It was overstaffed. So, anywho, where were we?
You were going to show us the tool.
Oh, yes, the tool. Okay. So, little lead in. So, one of the things that I wanted to do as I was managing people, and this is before I started to run businesses, I was building the management leadership training for basically service managers of Geek Squad departments. So, we had over 1,500 Geek Squad managers, and I was tasked with how do we train them to be better leaders? Now, I had a mentor tell me, Kyle, there's two things you always need to satisfy for your team. The first is they have to know what they're supposed to do. The second, they need to know how to do what they're supposed to do. So, as a 18-year-old kid, I went, well, that's easy. I just have to check the box twice for every single one of my employees. But I started to recognize a thing. So I built this thing called an expectation flywheel. And I'm going to go through it quickly for you. Small plug, there's a course in Empath that we're building all around this title and this subject. And I'm going to illustrate it for you guys because it's going to click. And you can use this in your business today, by the way. And it's fun because I can whiteboard it. So there's a little more visual elements on this. So when we're thinking about you as a leader, you have to think about where everybody is going. And so I discovered in running an MSP that a lot of times I couldn't set expectations because I didn't have expectations. Now, what is having expectations, right? This is your peer groups. This is learning. This is trial and error sometimes, right? This is your ability to truly figure out where your business is going. Well, in any good business, then, like I said, my mentor told me there's a second phase. I need to set expectations. Because, right, my employee just needs to know what the hell they're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, an hourly basis. How can I expect them to do anything at that point other than read my mind? You guys hiring mind readers? I never was able to hire one. Now, what happens in between this space? This is leadership. Because I am now able to tell people with confidence, whether it's a bad decision or a good decision, I will lead you into battle and I will own the results because I am the one making the decision on where we go. Well, in researching a lot of good leadership, another thing was apparent to me, right? Trust but verify. I had to be able to look, you all mentioned you do quality control. What you are saying is they have expectations, but I review those expectations. So now I need to verify expectations. So what happens though is, do you guys fire your employee the first time they make a mistake? No. When you recognize a process is kind of okay and needs some refinement, or you change your tool stack because, right, we all have shiny object syndrome and the stack is the most important thing to us. No, what you do is, in between this, is you mentor. And this is where mentorship and leadership have a divergence, right? Because sometimes I can mentor somebody without leading them where they're going. Now, after I mentor them enough and they still don't meet the mark, well, in between these three circles is accountability. Now, for those of you that know me, I am obsessed with this word. And why I am obsessed with accountability is because it has a positive and negative connotation. If it's negative and they can't verify those expectations and they can't meet them, well, I have to have the unfortunate conversation with saying, we've done everything we can to mentor you and lead you better. However, if they do meet them, I have now the opportunity to revisit expectations and improve them. I can move the goalpost. I know my team is good at it and I can improve it. As a leader now, I have made the right decision because my team can do it. And what happens is where all of these converge, This is results. Because if this all spins like a Jim Collins flywheel, we are now improving at the speed my team can improve. And not only that, my MSP is improving with it. So what is this for? This is ultimately your ability as a leader in your organization to show the requirements that all of your employees must uphold in order to transact accountability. This is their receipt. Did we have good expectations? Did we set them and build process and knowledge behind it? Did we give them a direct feedback and practice with them? Then it's a no-brainer. So, anywho, I'll get off that soapbox.
That wheel is awesome. I think I'm maybe even as impressed or equally impressed with your ability to quickly write on a whiteboard like that. Like, wow. Mine would not be nearly that legible.
I've done it a few times at this point.
I was gonna say, I think that felt very
practice.
You've done this before. So because we are running short on time, I do want to cover a little bit of how. So you've decided that you're going to add some leadership leaders. It's important, you know the count, you know maybe even who you might task to do that. How do you invest in those leaders? How do you help them grow their skill sets? Because not everybody's meant for that role, or it's not something you're born knowing how to do.
Yeah. I can tell you when I ran my MSP, we looked a lot into leadership development. We looked a lot into learning and design because we had this at Geek Squad when I was enterprise, and I wanted this at my MSP that was growing like crazy. So what did I do? I went and invested all this money into a learning management system and hired a manager of L&D. And next thing you know, I dropped almost $250,000 trying to figure out how we upskill our team. And what did I find? Just like your PSA, I bought a bunch of expensive things with nothing in it, and there's nothing worse than a blank page. So what you have to keep in mind is that if you're not a good manager as an owner, you're probably going to need to find a resource to better teach your managers how to better manage their people. So, I mean, I hate to say it, this is going to be a plug for Empath, but this is why I built the tool. Is I needed a way to quickly and affordably let MSPs build something to better manage their team, better manage their people. Like the whole expectation flywheel is something I'm trying to really have Empath help managers manage their team, because going into mentorship, if you're a good people manager, maybe you're not a good tech. I need the ability for something to better help them be a better tech, and I can't just always hire trainers. So you have to always think about in your MSP, how is your culture of continuous education supported? By the way, I know a lot of MSPs where they do bounties on, if you get A+ certified, I will give you $2,000. And then I go, cool, how many people have gotten that? One in the last 7 years. And I go, cool, why? Because they don't want to. At the end of the day, they are so beaten by all of the tasks that they have, they're not going to go home and train. So what you have to do as an MSP, think about how can I support continuous education as a requirement to work for your MSP. By the way, law firms, CPAs, all of these other professional services, it is a requirement to keep your license to practice to always be learning. Why as an MSP or an IT industry do we not require people to upskill? Is the world changing? Yes. Is the knowledge changing? Yes. Well, then we all need to be changing. So at your MSP, can I add a half hour a week, a 1 hour a week for my employees to just learn how to grow? Now, it doesn't have to be my platform. It could be YouTube for all I care. But right, how do I support them to always be growing and make it an expectation at my MSP to always be growing?
And you reference in the flywheel peers. That's another piece. So there's conferences out there designed for this, specifically MSP GeekCon. And I remember speaking to a young woman who had just taken her first service manager role. She'd been a service tech. They'd promoted her into service manager. And she asked me, who do I talk to? Like, how do I learn to do this? I said, these folks in the room. Like, these are the people who've done it. And those are the ones to keep walking with. And with that, we are at time. It always happens. Isabel, thank you for that amazing nugget there in the chat about providing 2 hours a week of on-the-clock training. It's something we at Huntress do as well for teams. Like, that is a really valuable thing to give as an investment that's also not requiring them, Kyle, to your point of expecting after hours time for people who are already overtaxed and need to be present with family and
By the way,
other
making that
and
2 hours
life.
from 3 to 5 o'clock or 4 to 5 o'clock is probably not also a good nugget, right? Try to make it
Nah,
early in the morning, 9 to 10, 10 to 11. Your logistical, have your dispatcher manage that. Anything more than 2 hours, though, your brain goes into edutainment mode. Also, 2 hours bleeds into your profit a little bit. So that 1 to 2 hours is the sweet spot.
perfect. So thank you everyone for joining us. Continue to have these conversations. Reach out to Kyle to learn more about some of the ways that they might be able to help. Find us, at shows, and let's continue this conversation. And we will talk again. Like I said, we have these every month, but July will be kind of the next leadership one that we do. Next month, though, we're doing how to do marketing using metrics. So I've got Jeremy Young guest hosting for me. He just came back to Huntress and joined the community team. And so he'll be talking a bit about using metrics that aren't FUD, that fear uncertainty, to really talk about cybersecurity specifically. So we will see you on the next round. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, no problem. I put my LinkedIn in chat, by the way, if anyone wants